This is a review of the Integrated Engineering DSG tune for the Mk7 GTI, the DQ250 6-speed transmission. And this is current as of January 2022. Integrated Engineering recently announced that they had made an update to this transmission tune, and I was curious to see how that update would perform. I had not used the previous one, but I have used about half a dozen different DSG tunes and thought they would be interested to find out how their software performed. So as far as the purchase process goes, it was very straightforward, very easy to get it ordered on their website. And receiving the tune is really just an authorization through their website, receiving an email saying you're authorized to go ahead with the install because you're doing the installation on your own. That happened very quickly. Within about 15 to 20 minutes of placing the order, I had received the email confirmation that gave authorization to go ahead and make the install onto the GTI. So the process of getting the software installed was very straightforward. Downloaded an application from the Integrated Engineering website, installed it onto a laptop, and then this is the cable. There is a cable here and the adapter that goes into the port on the car to flash the transmission's computer. The software is very straightforward and gives you good instructions on how to install the software onto the car, and probably took less than 5 minutes. I'd say from start to finish, less than 5 minutes, following the directions, making sure the battery tender was hooked up, etc. Once it actually started flashing, maybe 3 minutes to flash. So very fast. So overall, getting the software from Integrated Engineering and getting it onto the car went smoothly and very quickly. So this discussion is really going to be limited just to the drive mode. Sport mode is a little bit harder to characterize because that entails data logging through gear shifts at much higher RPMs, which are more difficult to record driving around on public streets. So this is just strictly limited to the drive mode. So one of the things to consider, or one thing to keep in mind when talking about the shift points on the transmission software is that there is an input, or rather the engine software has a play in when the transmission software is going to shift. And that's where you hear the discussion or talk about not using different software than what that manufacturer has provided. In this case, I don't have Integrated Engineering's engine software, and I wasn't going to spend $1,000 to get it just to find out how their transmission software worked. So to mitigate the risk of that, I used 3 different engine software tunes that I do have. The Cobb IS38 tune that they just supply with their device. I have a custom EQT tune, a custom stratified tune, and I have the Eurodyne IS38 adjustable tune. So I used all 4 of those and logged the car with each one of those to see how the shift points were affected, or if they were at all. For 3 of those, EQT, stratified, and Cobb all produced the same results. Eurodyne, slightly different. It tended to shift a little bit earlier using that software. So at least the trends that I saw with the shifting points were fairly consistent across all 4. Well, rather, 3 of them was consistent. 1 had a little bit of variation. So just something to keep in mind. I mean, that I can't rule that out completely, but although I'm pretty confident that after using 4 different tunes, I have a pretty good idea of how the transmission is shifting. So getting that out of the way. Overall impressions of the drive mode, it's okay. And definitely an improvement over stock, but there are some things I think that could be improved, and I'll go into those here right now. First gear to second gear. I'm going to put up interspersed some charts here that show kind of what's going on and maybe make it a little bit clearer. First gear into second gear, the engine speed at which it upshifts I think is a little bit low. And typically I'm shifting with the engine software that I'm using around 25% pedal position. And this chart showed that that's around 2000 RPM that you're shifting out of first into second. So when you get into second gear, you're under 1200 RPM. And my impression is that's a little bit low. Just the experience is you're trying to accelerate and now the car just shifted into second and you're down at 1200 RPM. You're not really in an area where it's accelerating. You don't have that torque leverage going on that to help get the car moving so much there. So that's something I would change about it. Second going into third, as this next chart shows, it's a very flat response. I mean, when you talk about throttle response, you think of pressing the throttle and you're getting a response. In this case, it's up to 35–40% pedal position. You're getting the same response no matter how far you push the pedal down. Whether it's a little or a lot, you're shifting up around 2400 RPM, which that would not be how I would shift if I was driving a manual transmission car. And so my personal philosophy on trying to tune DSG transmissions is to simulate how I would be shifting if I was driving a manual transmission. I suppose whoever tuned this at Integrated Engineering, maybe that's how they shift, not how I would shift. So that's something that I would have changed as well. And then you can see right around 40% or so, the curve starts to really climb. And that's, okay, at that point now, when you get that much pedal input, now it will start to hold off upshifting until you get to a higher engine speed. So I think that could have been worked better. Third, shown here, is a little more along the lines of what I would have expected. Kind of the curve starts to turn up a little bit sooner. Fourth to fifth, similar response. I think it's natural in the way that response to the pedal input. Fifth gear going into sixth gear, the 2400 RPM upshift, which is kind of the trend for integrated engineering. You see that again here. Problem is, in fifth gear at 2400 RPM, you're right around 60 miles per hour. So this tune doesn't shift into sixth until you're 60 miles an hour, or above. And for me, where I'm driving, if I'm not getting out on that type of a highway where it's 60 or more miles an hour, I kind of would like the transmission to shift into sixth. If I'm cruising along at 55 miles an hour, I'd like to see it shift into sixth gear for the duration instead of me having to manually shift it up into sixth gear. So that's something I think could be worked a little bit better. Switching over to the topic of accelerating downshifts. And this is where you're depressing the pedal pretty far and you want the car to accelerate more rapidly, so you're expecting it to downshift. Overall, I think this tune did a good job with this. It's a pretty natural or expected amount of pedal depression when it finally does do a downshift. Now I only looked mostly at the upper gears like fourth, fifth, and sixth. Really didn't look at like second gear, smashing the pedal to get down into first gear and accelerate. That's a little bit of an unusual circumstance, and I just didn't look at it. And it comes up so rarely that it's not something I would really be too concerned about with. So overall, I thought the accelerating downshift worked pretty well. The one other aspect of the DSG tunes that I focus in on is the coasting downshift. That is, you're letting off the pedal, you're coming up to a stop, slowing down, and you're looking for the car to downshift to a lower gear. I thought overall it was a little bit low. It almost reminds me of being stock. I didn't go and compare with what the stock engine RPM is when you lift off the throttle and you got zero pedal input, what it downshifts at. But this is probably not far from it. So you notice that in fifth gear or fourth gear, you're getting down around 1200 RPM and it's still remaining in that gear, which isn't so much a problem if you are actually going to come to a stop, but if you're slowing and then going to continue, you're now down at 1200 RPM, which may or may not be suitable. So just something else that I thought probably could use a little bit more work is that area. Okay, so overall impressions for the Integrated Engineering DSG tune for the DQ250. It's okay. It's better than stock. It has some points to it that I think could be refined, which I've gone over here in this video. Hopefully Integrated Engineering maybe gets some of this feedback and incorporates it and we see another update in the future. I suggest comparing to some of the other ones that I've put data out there for and try and determine which one suits your driving style. It really does come down to how you would want to shift, and that's very subjective. So what I'm giving as far as my opinion is based on what I would like the tune to do. This may be different from what somebody else does. So hopefully that review was helpful.